Hey everyone, this is Daymon Ashcord, the author of Makerborn, which releases June 15th. This is my debut novel, and it's literally my first book I've ever written. Other debut authors, sometimes their debut, but they have 20 books in the closet somewhere. This is legitimately my first book and my first time doing a video introducing myself. Hence, it's a little bit low budget. I don't have a cool little bookshelf behind me, and I'm using just the normal kind of iPhone gear here. Anyway, so I thought it was about time I introduced myself a little bit more. You could put a face behind the book and behind all the other social media posts around Makerborn. So I'm just going to go through some questions that folks have asked me about the book, and hopefully you'll get a little bit more insight into the process of how the book and the creative process is actually done. So the first question is, which character was the hardest to write? It's a good question, interesting question. I would say the hardest, so there's two main characters. There's Alondra, whose daughter has been kidnapped, and Bez, who's a younger man, and his parents were murdered in front of him. So he's on a revenge quest. Alondra is trying to rescue her from the evil nobility. They're not called nobles, but that's effectively what they are. As you can imagine, then it's pretty dark. This is pretty grim, what the characters are dealing with. But the Bez was harder to write, and that might be a surprise because I'm a guy and Bez is a guy. Alondra's obviously it's a mother in her late 30s. But it's harder to write Bez because he not only is he younger, which means he grows a lot in so many different ways, being a younger person, but he was enslaved in the mines. Once again, yeah, tough life. They both had some tough lives. And being enslaved in mines, he was sheltered from this kind of empire, this part of the continent. And he doesn't really have a lot of social skills or a lot of great social skills, or particularly in relational interrelational skills, and in understanding the norms and culture and customs of this part of the continent. So everything for him is a lot of growth, a lot of learning, a lot of trial and error. Him even trying to romantically hit on ladies, it's awkward because he just doesn't have this experience. So for him, it was much more difficult. Alondra, an adult, she's very experienced, very competent. She knows this part of the world, this part of the continent, and she's more fully formed. So it was easier to write her. Which character is most like me? You've probably heard this before. Every little bits and pieces of all the characters, the main characters, the side characters, are express me and my personality in different parts of my life and at different points in time in my life. I would say, though, just to give a more concrete example, like Bez is like me in a sense where he is snarky, a bit of a wise ass. He does things without thinking. Now, that's not me anymore, but when I was younger, I was definitely more similar to Bez when I was just more action oriented, would just leap before I looked, and always had some kind of wisecrack like I know everything. So that definitely echoes a bit of me when I was younger. Who would survive a horror movie? I would say Alondra would. Now, Alondra is also a magical bounty hunter. That's her profession when she's not trying to find and rescue her daughter. So you would think she's badass, right? And she could handle a horror movie. But she would not be able to survive, though. It's because of that overconfidence, right? She'll go into that dark cave, you hear growling monsters, and she figures she's tough. She knows how to beat people up. She's very confident. She also has some abilities, some magical abilities. So she could handle anything. So she would go into that dark cave and get smoked. Whereas Bez, he's much more practical. He hears something, he's, oh, someone could die in there. I'm out of here. Yeah, Bez would survive. My favorite relationship dynamic in the book, there's a lot of cool and interesting dynamics with the main characters and the side characters. I would say, though, a few of the side characters, their relationship with everyone else is pretty interesting. So there's and they're engaging and funny. There's, to name two, and there's a handful of side characters. It's a larger book. So to name two, one is Les Tech. This is an older, grumpy performance trooper, like an actor and a playwright. And he's almost past his prime. He's got, maybe sleeps a little too much or whatever. He's got his little challenges. But yeah, he's a fascinating character. He's a little bit bombastic and hyperbolic because he's an actor. So he's a bit of a character. And then there's Caprick, who's like a mercenary. He's a half-man. He's a dwarf. So because of him growing up as a small half-man, he's been picked on and he's had to develop a lot of coping strategies. So he's also an interesting character to follow. The scene that emotionally destroyed me, this is a dark, epic fantasy, and that means it's not a happy ending and not everyone's going to survive. So when there are characters that die, for me, that was emotionally challenging, in part because my mother passed away last year. I'm still grieving, will be grieving my entire life, even though right now I'm not breaking down, I'm making a video, but I still have this underlying melancholy. And when I'm dealing with scenes that relate to grief, relate to death, the loss of someone, or it's a lot of family focus or Landra and trying to get back her daughter, when you have these family challenges, those are really difficult because then I'm reliving my grief. So those are really challenging. The scene that almost got deleted, I would say there was a few scenes, but certainly one that there was a lot of debate around, relates to a Coliseum scene, which I thought was pretty epic. Some debate, shouldn't I keep it? Is it really crucial? But I thought it was an awesome scene, one of those kind of grand scenes that are pretty epic in scope. So that stayed in. So you tell me, if you like the Coliseum scene, then I'm glad I kept it. Why I wrote this series. This relates to what I was mentioning before, that not only that I lost my mom last year, but I've had a lot of hardships and difficulties throughout my life. Now, not everything was terrible. I've had some, like most people, you have ups and downs, and I've had some good times for sure. But I've had probably more than my fair share of hardships, whether that's health challenges, whether it's economic challenges, whether it's just poor decisions causing trouble. I've had a lot of difficult hardships that I had to endure, a lot of physical, emotional pain. And because of that, I relate to these type of books more often, meaning grim and dark storytelling. And frankly, that's what I found escape and emotional kind of comfort from. When I was in my darkest moments, I would read these kind of dark fantasy books, and that really gave me a lot of emotional, like I said, emotional comfort, catharsis, and relief, listening and reading to these type of books, because I could relate to them, because I was not in a good place, and I could not really believe, and not only believe, but I just didn't really feel any emotional connection to stories where there's a good guy and a bad guy, and the good guy always wins, and everything's okay, and oh, they die, but then magically they come back to life. No, that's not like reality. Even though this is fantasy and fantasy isn't real, you could write it, you could ground it in a way that's much more visceral and realistic with the challenges that we all face in life. And that's what I found more in these dark fantasy stories, and also more dark humor, which also taught me that you can laugh. You can still laugh. Yes, things are terrible, but you can laugh at it, and that brings you some comfort. And that's what I just gravitate to that more, because I just find it, in a way, the case for grim, dark storytelling, for me, simply put, is that it is more realistic to the human experience, that I would think most people have challenges in different periods of their life. It's really I think it's rare person where everything's perfect and everything works out. You could be optimistic, but doesn't mean that's what reality is. So, and that little speech there. The original idea versus what the story became. As a new author writing his literal first book, it evolved so much that it's hard to say just one. I can't really pinpoint one specific thing, but I would say one core idea that was the genesis of the world is I was in Poland and I was listening to Polish folklore, and there was one story. It was either gods or fairies. Well, let's say there were fairies. So these sibling fairies were running, and they were on this kind of long-term escape from this big bad fairy who killed the rest of their family. So they've been for years just trying to escape and evade this big bad fairy. And then that struck me as interesting, that what if you had these gods that were fleeing this bad god who killed their all the relatives, and they're fleeing this bad god throughout the cosmos, and then they find a planet where they could kind of be hidden from this big bad god. And what would that look like? What would the planet look like? It would have to be some kind of special planet to hide these gods. And that just snowballed into more and more questions, and fleshed out this world. So that was a kind of core idea. And there's a lot of Polish influence in the book. I was born in Poland, but I grew up in the US, but there's a lot of Polish influence in the book. So for all my Polish brothers and sisters out there, there's a new Witcher in town. How long it took me to write this book? It took, I would say, about 3 years. There was a bit of a pause during COVID. Everyone got paused during COVID. But I would say generally in total it was about 3 years, and it's a 230,000 word epic fantasy. So it takes time, and especially for a new author. Things that inspire this world, writers get inspiration daily and all over the place. But I would say, so some concrete example, certainly Joe Abercrombie. He's my kind of virtual mentor. He doesn't know it, but he is. His books are fantastic. So I definitely got a lot of inspiration there. And certainly his book called The Best Sir Cold, fantastic. So I drew upon that. Believe it or not, Mistborn from Brandon Sanderson, I got some inspiration there. Arcane on Netflix. It's a kind of anime, but it's pretty fantastic. I recommend that. Polish folklore, a bit of Roman Legion Empire, probably a smattering of other places, but those are the most obvious inspirations. What my writing days actually look like. You could help me make me a full-time writer. That would be amazing. And if you like my work, then I'll be able to churn out much more quicker. But I'm not full-time yet. And so I don't have a typical writing day, but let's say just generally what I do, and because sometimes I have pauses, I'll write every day. I'll sit down and I will reread the prior chapter or reread the prior 3 or 4 pages, just to ground me back in the story, to remember, where I am in the story, the characters, the feel of the book. So rereading 3, 4, 5 pages or a prior chapter, that helps. Then when I sit down as well, I already have a scene prepared. And that doesn't mean I have a whole scene written, but it's more bullet points, certain key features of a scene I already have. I know what I'm going to write. So when I sit down, I'm not just looking at a blank page and trying to figure out what I'm doing. And so what I mean is I'll have, is it day, is it night? What characters in there? What are the characters' objectives? How do I want to start the scene? What's the intro hook? But then I also do something like scene sequel. This is a common little tool for authors. So if it's a character had, I don't know, lost their puppy the prior chapter, you don't start the new chapter with that character and they're like happy and they're throwing a party. So they need to digest the event that occurred, right? So I always kind of tag and make sure I understand what the character experienced previously, so they're emotionally attuned to that. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense, right? You want their consistency in the emotions and a realistic kind of emotional expression given what they've been dealing with. So that's how I sit down and at least approach to writing. And then maybe, let's say it's 10 or 11 a.m., I start writing after I do some jogging, do some exercise, I'm more refreshed. Then I'll write for 4 or 5 hours, probably around 5 or so, and then I'm done. Can't write 10 hours straight. I can, but you get burnt out. A normal day would be like 5, maybe 6 hours a month. things readers should pay attention to. I have a lot of decent foreshadowing, so a lot of little Easter eggs, little secrets that I'm putting in the story that makes sense later on, whether it's foreshadowing or it explains like a larger piece of history of the book. So I would just say, keep your eye out. I don't have a lot of throwaway sentences, just that do not influence the larger book. I try to be pretty thoughtful about what I put in there. If you like this book, you'll probably if you like Joe Abercrombie, you'll like this book. If you like Mark Lawrence, you'll like this book. Rob J. Hayes, Michael Fletcher, you'll like this book. Maybe even Brandon Sanderson in the sense, because he's not necessarily dark, but his big epic world building, you'll like my book. And I have a decent magic system as well with rules and consequences. Brandon Sanderson's another virtual mentor of mine. So in terms of building magic system, I kind of followed a lot of his logic. But I wouldn't say this book leans heavily on magic and everyone's using magic. Magic users are enslaved. Not really a spoiler, that's the world. But there's some exceptions. Some institutions like bounty hunters are magic users that find other magic users to slave. Eating your own. But point being is that it's more of like a George Martin approach where there's magic in the world, but you rely on characters to solve the problems and their own ingenuity. But there's definitely some cool magic moments, without a doubt. Yeah. So next, choose your favorite trope. Oh, I like the anti-hero. So if that is a trope, but something like that, anti-hero. And beyond that, I like exploring how one becomes a villain. All right. The character arc of a villain. So it's not necessarily a trope, but it's what I kind of seem to like. What makes someone act a certain way and be a certain way given all their experiences, and especially if they started off in, let's say, in a good place, how do they become that villain? That's a pretty cool story for me. Would you survive in this world? I would be, smoked out real quick. No way I would survive. Who would you trust as a character? I think that's a tough one. It would be based on their motivations, right? So Bez wants his vengeance, so as long as I'm supporting him on his little vengeance quest, yeah. And Alondra, if I'm helping her find her daughter, but watch out, if you're not aligned with their motivation, boy, they live in a dog-eat-dog world, so you gotta be careful. Okay, so you just open chapter 1, and suddenly you see Alondra looking through an eyeglass, exploring this large keep. It's a noble lady's keep, but they're not called nobles, they're called descendants. These are the descendants, the literal descendants of Beton the Godslayer. He's the big hero 1,000 years ago who imprisoned the old gods. So all of his descendants are now the ruling class. So Alondra's looking at descendant Leblinen's keep, trying to confirm whether or not her daughter is there. She's been looking for her daughter for years. And yeah, if she's there, then her and her partner are going to figure out a plan how to rescue her daughter. And the keep is in this certain district in the capital city. It's got a lot of spires. It's got their descendants' ancestors all on statues. And there's these great war hawks size of horses flying around the keep. And so it's a pretty cool setup. And it's pretty tense because Alondra wants her daughter back. She's been stolen from her. It's pretty tough for her. Okay, what readers can expect? The mood, the vibe. It's going to be dark. It's going to be grim. It's one of my Goodreads ARC reviewers said this is the definition of grimdark. So these characters are dealing with a lot of challenges, trauma, grief, and they don't get a lot of breaks. They keep this one bad thing happening after another. So there's not a lot of, I do introduce some levity, and some lighter moments, but generally they're just having a tough time. And you see what it's like to experience just when things just don't go your way, no matter how hard you try. So expect some dark humor, for sure. I think I was making some folks laugh, but expect a darker, grim vibe that very visceral, very character driven, and with a deep POV where you're really feeling, embodying the characters, and eventually you really root for them, regardless of the difficulties and the things that they do for love. Because in this case, love is a great thing, but it could become monstrous if you'll do anything for those you love, and anything, and that you could become quite a monster. So that's what you can expect. Okay, signing off. Thank you, everyone. And remember, Makerborn releases June 15th. Really appreciate your support as a debut author. If you could tell your friends, share the post,